Chief Justice Minton, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today about this very important issue.
Well, Jacqueline, I'm happy to have this chance to talk to you, and especially to address the folks who might be looking at this about the matters that are going to be our interview.
Perfect. So the courts just released a guide to identifying, addressing, and reducing racial and ethnic disparities. So this is a huge issue that we're talking about all across the country. Obviously, it's such an important issue. So within the document, it talks about data that clearly shows how racial and ethnic disparities impact all aspects of the court system. So in these findings, kind of tell us what you saw within the court systems that exist currently, and then we'll get to how we're addressing them.
Well, I want to, I guess start at the beginning in terms of what are we really talking about here. I don't know that I don't know in this day and time, and with all the conversation that's been going on around the country, whether it's even necessary to define the terms, but we refer to it in our, within our shorthand. Our acronym is the RED program. It's racial and ethnic disparities, which really just represent a differential treatment within the system. And we're not just talking about what an individual might perceive to be individual acts of discrimination or bias. It is a system. If the system is built to produce results, the system has been said in the past, is designed for the results it gets, and you don't like the results, then there's got to be something about the system that needs work. And one of the results that we have seen, and we've known this, but we really in the last few years have really come to identify that we truly do have a system that is built to produce racially disparate results, and that's got to change. That's got to change. And so we are in the court system committed to doing what we can do to make that change. It all came about, it all started, it didn't just start. We've been knowing this, suspecting this, knowing this without knowing exactly what to do about it for a good while. My predecessor on the court, Joe Lambert, was Chief Justice, and he helped establish, or he did establish in Louisville, the Racial Fairness Commission that has been at work through his term and through all of mine to try, particularly in the city of Louisville, where Louisville has the largest African-American population of any of our communities. And so we've really concentrated there on we've had listening sessions, we've done lots of things. So we've known this has been, it's been there. But beginning in with the adoption of Senate Bill 200 in 2014, this focused on this was an omnibus bill that focused on the juvenile justice system. And it made a lot of changes because we were saying to the legislature that we're seeing way too many children, way too many youth in the middle of the court system, too many incarcerated, too many going through criminal. So there needs to be a better way to do things. And so Senate Bill 200 was a big effort to do that, reducing court-involved kids, but sending them into diversion programs. And we sent those, and part of that process was for us to examine the data, measure the data, and interpret the data. Some of the data that we were finding is as we were increasing the diversion programs for youth, we were finding what we thought was true, and the data proves it, that racial disparity existed from the time of complaint. We were seeing better outcomes, but there were more better outcomes for the Caucasian youth and more failed outcomes for Black youth. So we started looking at that. It just hit us in the face. And so we have to come up with ways. We can't just worry about this. We got to fix it. We got to try to fix it. So that's what this has been about. And it's been a truly eye-opening experience. I can't say enough about how proud I am of the work that Rachel Bingham has done, our juvenile and Family Services Division. And not just Rachel, but she has truly energized the department and throughout AOC. We now have a person who is working in our HR department on kind of another aspect of this. We're trying to create a culture in the courts where the people that you encounter in the court system look like the people in the community. We have more racial and ethnic diversity. But we've got a lot of work to do, but I want the people of Kentucky to know that this court system is about doing something.
Absolutely. And the report definitely touches on the differences between the first contact with the court system that African-American youth face versus Caucasian youth.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other things as well. But like you said, this is a culture shift. And speaking of that bill, there are things, and the report also talks about how a lot of these things are already embedded into the programs and the policies that are supposed to help these people.
Right.
So is it legislation that has to fix it? Is it the courts at the local level? I know there's some recommendations for local courts. How do we fix it?
Well, I mean, it's going to require all of us. There are legislative changes, surely, but there's deep-seated cultural changes that we need to make. We've done across the board what we call cultural collision training to help us for all of our elected officials, all of the elected judges, the justices, the judges on the Court of Appeals, the clerks, and the employees in clerks' offices everywhere. We have tried to permeate branch with at least a self-awareness for me as a person and for me as in the role that I play to know that this is something that we all need to be aware of and we need to be talking about it. We need to talk to each other about it. We need to talk to our justice partners because we do what we can do, and then we can engage conversations with lawyers who come before the courts, with the cabinets, the executive branch cabinets, who deal with these issues, and with law enforcement. All of these are our justice partners, people we deal with the day in and day out. If we're part of that, we have to engage them in that conversation as well, because we all have to be a part of trying to understand the situation and try to rectify it.
Absolutely. So in the report, it talks about how to identify what's going on within local court systems or within the justice system, make an assessment, and then take action as well. Some of the things that are suggested are different assessment forms and different bias trainings and a lot of different recommendations. How are you guys going to make sure that the local courts and at all levels, people are taking this seriously? And how are you going to track progress in these areas as well?
Well, the way we identified our problem, really were able to identify it was through data that we had gathered. And so there's an aspect of gathering data that not only is just to identify the problem, but then if you're going to on the end of it, there's no point in gathering data unless you use it tool to assess where you are. And so it's kind of a circular thing. We've got to identify the problem, to construct the solutions, then try to institutionalize those solutions, and then gather data to tell us, are we doing a good job about that? So that's got to happen at lots of levels. And we've started in the juvenile justice piece. And I think that's important to start there for a lot of reasons. But we're also then expanding it to other statewide programs that we have. Of course, the Juvenile Family Services is a statewide program the court has. So that touches every jurisdiction, every county in the Commonwealth. With the way, and our belief is that starting there makes sense. We had to because of SB 200 forced us in that direction, but it makes sense because if you can begin at that stage, while these are still children in the law, and influence them in positive ways through designing programs attempt to deal with whatever their criminal behaviors or other behaviors might have been, then we are hopefully, if we're successful, we're eliminating. He or she won't become an adult criminal. So we begin the process there. So we're dealing with that. We're also dealing with our specialty courts, which would be our drug courts, because we're seeing that our populations in the drug courts, sadly, reflect the same systemic problems, that we've got an under-involvement, an under-success rate of African-American people in drug court programs. We need to do something about that. So it's going to be a system-wide, and it's going to require continuing evaluation and a huge judicial education piece. If you're asking me about what do we do with about our judges all around the Commonwealth, we all need to become more familiar with this and accept the responsibility that judges are leaders. They may not be able to actually affect the change, but they sure are good conveners, because I have discovered in my years as experience as a judge that people will show up if I call a meeting, usually.
In the report, you talk about, and you've kind of talked about it today, about how to address this and to make significant, meaningful change, the courts and all levels need to be honest with themselves about the failings that have already occurred in order to move forward. What are some, and we've touched on a lot of them, but what are some of the biggest failings that you've seen within the court system, especially in the last couple of years as you guys have been doing this work? What are the biggest things you saw that you said this has to be addressed?
Well, we identified at the specific with the juvenile system, the touch points. What point we're encountering on the entry level, on the touch point. We identify the touch points and the people coming. We look at the numbers of people coming in. Well, we see people even coming into the system, disparate numbers. And when I mean disparate numbers, the percentages by population, of African Americans coming into the system, shockingly more than coming in, than white kids coming in. So we look at, we identify these touch points in the system, and we see, okay, well, here's what is happening. Why is that happening? We deal with schools. Part of our constituency is the schools, the people we get, coming out of the schools. So we look at these touch points. We try to identify, well, what is it? We find a disparity, and then how can we identify why that disparity is happening? And if so, what can we do to rectify it? And that has to happen. It's going to be a process. It's going to take, it's a huge culture change. It's been a huge, a long time in building, and we're not going to fix it, unfortunately, in a short order, but we need to be addressing it very aggressively.
And like you said, you all have been working on a lot of these issues for a couple of years now, and this report just came out last month. But do you feel that 2020, whenever I talk to legislators lately, I kind of make the point that now more than ever, I think people are ready to make these kinds of changes, especially legislatively in terms of bipartisan support. Do you get any feelings from the courts that people are ready to really take this seriously?
Well, I think so. Our work preceded all of the unrest that has come about in the Commonwealth and the country, dealing with the racial and ethnic issues that maybe have surfaced along with all of the issues around the pandemic. It's sort of, pandemic has been the cataclysmic event that has maybe brought to the surface problems that have been there for a long time. So, and although we've been working on these issues long before COVID arrived and the pandemic arrived and the racial and ethnic issues have arisen around the state and around the country, I think all of us now feel a sense of urgency that we didn't feel before. I have to say that about myself personally. I think that this really has brought to the fore the fact that we can't delay our attention to these matters. That this is an historic moment for that reason. I have a colleague who's the Chief Justice of Michigan, actually, and I quote her often. A lot of the things that have happened since March have resulted in changes in the court system, and this pandemic was not something we wanted. But it may be something we needed in terms of recognizing opportunities to go ahead and make changes that we might have just talked about or thought about, or maybe knew we could do, but have been sitting on it because we didn't need to. Well, now we've been forced to use technology in ways that we never thought about before. We actually thought about it, but we as judges, I have to confess, change is very hard for judges. And sometimes we've been forced into these changes, and I think they're going to have some lasting value. This is one thing that will have lasting value. If we put some legs on this, we'll make some good change, and history will be better because we made these changes.
And like you said, it is a historic moment. And I definitely do think that, and I think it's great that you said from your personal perspective, you feel even more of a sense of urgency. But for people who have been affected by the system previously and have seen these disparities firsthand, I know that probably a lot of them are thinking people are trying to do the work, they mean well, but they're still concerned that they're not going to see actual meaningful change, really see it. So as the head of the courts and from the perspective of the criminal justice system, what's your message to those people?
Well, my message is that we're going to be, we're working hard on this. We have produced, I think probably one of the leading things, maybe in the country. We've shared this with other court systems, and we're getting a lot of interest from our colleagues across the country. That we have an opportunity to make some real systemic change. First of all, acknowledge the failures and to try to begin to institutionalize change that will bring about the change that I think we all want. And I know that some folks will rightfully conclude, you all talked a big game for a long time. What have you done about it? And that's a fair criticism. I'm willing to accept that criticism, but I'm also saying to you, recognizing that to be the case, the court system in Kentucky is about making this change and making it happen as quickly as we are able to do it.
And change in any form of government, and really in any way, is hard and oftentimes not as quick as any of us would like to see. But
that's true.
Let's talk. So to wrap things up, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want people to know, and what are the next steps in terms of making these changes happen?
Well, we're going to continue our, we actually, and if you were to talk to some of my folks at AOC who work so hard on this, they could quote actual numbers for you, but statistically, we can show that we already are making a difference. It is already in the short time between 2016 and 2019, this institutionalization of these changes is making a difference. And statistically, to give you some comparisons for where things were for people of color before. So these are maybe incremental changes, but they're big changes. And so, our goal is to continue the process. It's not one and done. We don't just say we've done it. We've got to continue the process. It's got to be a continuous improvement effort. And so my promise to the people of Kentucky is that the court system has really recognized its own failings in this regard, maybe not as extensively, but we're still working on that, and that we intend to do what we can do to address it. And I want them to count on that, and I want them to hold us accountable for that. We need to be able to demonstrate what we're doing, and I'm committed to making those, making all this information available. And for our justice partners, we're coming to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Justice Minton, for taking the time to talk about this important work that's happening. Of course, we're all trying to make changes at every level, but especially with the courts and the justice system, I think it's critically important, and it's great to be able to hear about the work you guys are doing. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I appreciate your taking the time to talk with me about this.